here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these different worldviews and these concepts within them, okay? Does that make sense? As we break this down. And you're going to see a greater range of just, instead of just fundamentalism versus humanism, we're going to see a greater range of thought within the United States today. And again, these are just 4 of the major worldviews that we're looking at. They're the most common ones that you'll see in the United States. They are not necessarily the only worldviews that you will see, and they're definitely not the only worldviews that you'll see throughout the world. If we went throughout the world, we'd add, many, many more to this. But for sake of brevity and time, we're just going to focus in on the 4 most common in the U.S. Okay, so core books for each of these worldviews. For secular humanists, it's the Humanist Manifestos, 1, 2, and 3. 2 is by far the most influential. 2 sort of like reinterprets 1 and changes 1, kind of contradicts 1 and replaces 1. 3 just kind of adds a little bit more to 2. So 2 is probably the most important of the 3, but all 3 are worth reading in my opinion to really understand where secular humanists are coming from. Okay, so Humanist Manifestos 1, 2, and 3. It was kind of this time period where manifestos, like the Communist Manifesto and so forth, were like kind of big things, and different groups did their manifestos, right? It's kind of gone away today. You don't see that quite as much today, but that was the thing at that time. Okay, for Christian fundamentalists, the Bible. Okay, Islamic fundamentalists, you would of course see the Quran. For Mormons, you would see the Book of Mormon and so forth. Okay, but for Christian fundamentalists, it's the Bible, and they're definitely the most influential. Make up about 80 million, 90 million Americans today. Okay, postmodernists, it's the writings of Nietzsche, Foucault, Derrida, and Rorty. Okay, Nietzsche, Foucault, Derrida, and Rorty. Nietzsche and especially Derrida are considered deconstructionists, especially Derrida. Deconstructionism is basically the idea where you break things down to where you show it doesn't have a definition. It doesn't have, in other words, there is not a truth, an objective truth. Everything is according to your opinion, your worldview, your subjectivity. Okay? And then cosmic humanists, these are just a few of the thinkers that contribute to cosmic humanism. There's actually quite a few thinkers that contribute to humanism, but some of the most popular are Deepak Chopra, Ken Wilber, and Alan Watts. Okay, there's actually tons of thinkers in this area, and frankly, there's tons of postmodern thinkers, and there's tons of Christian thinkers, and there's tons of humanist thinkers, and so forth too. Next one. So philosophy. So what is the philosophy of each of these groups? The core basic idea. For secular humanists, it's naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that all things stem from a natural process or system. So even our personalities, right, can be explained through evolutionary terms. Everything comes from natural processes. Okay, does that make sense? Your personality, has to do with your, chemical makeup of your brain and your DNA and the world around you that you grew up in, blah blah blah. Everything has to do with natural processes. Okay. Christian fundamentalists would say, no, it's supernaturalism. Everything is as a result of the will of God. Okay. So those two seem fairly obvious, right? You guys with me? They seem fairly obvious, fairly, you can see why, they're definitely in contrast to each other. They're definitely, and oftentimes we only see the world as these people versus these people. But the reality is it's simply just not that simple, and postmodernism and cosmic humanism are becoming and are likely just as powerful as these two in the United States today. Okay? So for postmodernists, it's anti-realism. Okay? So first, let's define realism. Realism is where things are according to reality, and that there is a definable reality. So realism in art is where you create art that looks as real as possible. Okay. So for example, characters in a Pixar picture, human characters don't really look exactly like humans look, right? They're exaggerated. Why? because realism is kind of creepy, right? When they try to make them look too human, because they're not quite human, right? And so, but that's realism, okay? So in philosophy, realism is just basically, you know, things are as accurate or as real as possible. In many ways, secular humanists are realists when it comes to their philosophy, or try to be anyway, okay? Anti-realism, on the other hand, is where you cannot define reality. All reality is subjective. Everything that we say we know is just subjective to the person saying it. There is no objective truth. Now, that's not to say that things aren't more or less useful. So, for example, knowing how to grow and take care of a tree is useful as compared to thinking that you can knock on a stone wall and it'll give you fruit. That's a less useful belief or idea. So you can still think in terms of, okay, this is more useful and less useful, but in the end, everything is subjective according to a postmodernist. There is no truth 100% clear and accurate. There might be better ideas and worse ideas, but nothing is 100%, okay? A non-naturalist, on the other hand, non-naturalism is, again, sort of the opposite of naturalism, okay? Non-naturalism is the meta-ethical view which claims that ethical statements or sentences are expressed as propositions. Let me give you an example. Those who love others are more likely to be loved. Or those who love others receive love in return. Give me a check mark if you can say, yeah, that's basically true. Now, is it 100% true? No, not necessarily. Can you love others and then sometimes they don't, love you back or whatever? But generally speaking, if you are a person who gives love and loves other people, you are likely to receive love, right? And a non-naturalist will say, you can look at the world, and while you might not be able to say with 100% conviction this is true, you can look at it in a fairly broad stroke and say, but yeah, generally it is. Those who love tend to receive love, okay? Those who are kind tend to receive more kindness. So what's the difference here? A naturalist will say, no, everything comes as a result of some, process, natural process. It comes back to the physical reality of the world. A non-naturalist says, no, there's these meta-ethical things that you can't prove through physical, natural terms. But you can still determine truth without a physical or natural process to back it up. You can say those who love are more likely to receive love. In a way, generalities, but maybe that's too general a way of saying that, Kaylee. They're saying that you can define truth even if it's not absolute. Whereas a Christian fundamentalist will say, you define truth by this set of strict absolute, right? A cosmic humanist will say, no, but you can look at the world around you and go, yeah, that's consistent with reality. That's more true. Okay, let's keep going. How about ethics? Okay. For a secular humanist, this is moral relativism. And this belief system gets really attacked by the Christian fundamentalists, and it gets misinterpreted, frankly. Moral relativism isn't the idea that there's no truth. Moral relativism is do the moral thing according to the situation. So instead of having an absolute, thou shalt not steal, a moral relativist will say, well, what is the best thing to do in the situation? Maybe if you truly are starving and you're locked in a store for a weekend and you can't get out, maybe you should eat some of their food and, it's justifiable. Does that make sense? So moral relativism often will agree in many instances with the Christian fundamentalist, but they're just saying it's really situational and do the best thing according to the situation. Does that make sense? Where again, as a Christian fundamentalist, they would say, here's the strict laws and rules that one should follow. And they tend to teach things and preach things in moral absolutes. This is always wrong, this is always right. Okay? Now, in reality, I think Christian fundamentalists have been challenged on that idea enough to where they will say, okay, well, some things are left to the mystery of God, or God can make exceptions, or, they'll kind of allow for exceptions within it as well. So I've yet to really find a true fundamentalist who will go that far with it, but they tend to see things in more absolutes, and secular humanists tend to see things as more situational. Okay, you with me? You kind of understand the difference there? Cool. Okay, cultural relativism. This is kind of the one that these guys get accused of, but they don't really believe in. Cultural relativism is to say, A, there is no morals. There are no morals. There are no moral absolutes, okay? First and foremost, no moral absolutes. But you should be aware that likely your culture believes that there is. So even if you think it's morally corrupt to pay taxes, if you don't want to spend your life in prison, you probably ought to pay your taxes. Does that make sense? So it's practical, but it still rejects the idea of any sort of moral definitive answer. There is no, there is no definitive answer to moral questions, okay? Then cosmic humanist simply believes in karma, which a lot of you are familiar with karma. What is karma? Yeah, in many ways, DJ, that's what it is. In many ways it is. A little more broader than that in many ways, but yeah, it is kind of give what you get what you give. There is sort of again, with a kind of non-naturalist concepts of, those who love tend to receive more love. Those who are kind tend to receive more kindness. Yeah. Okay, politics. Secular humanists tend to believe in liberalism. Now, liberalism often will just get associated, hook, line, and sinker with, U.S. democratic progressivism, Democratic Party progressivism. And while that tends to be largely true of secular humanists, in a much broader sense, they're liberals. In a more traditional sense of the term, they believe in things like democracy, civil liberties, human rights. You know what I mean? And they believe that those rights ought to be protected and fostered by the government. Okay, and many secular humanists tend to believe also in what's called interventionism, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second, to where you can also not only help people in terms of protecting their rights, but certain people have natural advantages, or maybe not natural advantages, but have advantages, like they grow up wealthy or whatnot, and others don't. And so they'll often see the world as, we got to try to even that playing field or help out the little guy, things like that. So it does kind of come back to that progressivism. So it tends to go that direction. But not every secular humanist is truly a liberal Democrat or a progressive. So more largely, it's kind of more traditional liberalism, but many of them will view, tend to be on the more progressive end of the spectrum. Cool. Okay. For Christian fundamentalists, it's justice and order, okay? Or in other words, conservatism, okay? It's really about justice, order, and conservatism not in the populist, almost libertarian, sort of, Tea Party in a way, end of the spectrum, but more of your mainstream conservatism, right? Justice, order, let's follow our traditions, let's keep to our traditions, let's keep to the common ways, let's not change things too much, let's not, it's more conservatism,